Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about creepy encounters in the Blue Ridge Mountains. These are real from cabin dwellers who came face to face with something they couldn't explain. But before we dive in, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to like and share it with your friends. I'd also love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's begin. I was 29 when it happened. I remember because it was right after I quit my job. I didn't even have a backup plan, just this vague idea that I needed space. So I packed what I thought was a respectable attempt at gear, some trail food, a borrowed tent, and a secondhand pack that still smelled like someone else's deodorant. And I drove toward the Blue Ridge Mountains. It wasn't planned out. I just followed back roads until pavement turned into gravel, and gravel turned into potholes. I parked at the end of what I think was an old logging road. It didn't show up on GPS, and there were no signs, just a break in the trees and this moss-covered concrete barrier that looked like someone had tried to block the path half-heartedly 20 years ago. The graffiti on it was so faded I could barely make out letters. Could have said "keep out," could have said "buckle up." No way to tell. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. My sister got the rough outline, somewhere west of Lynchburg, maybe near the Tennessee border, near an old forestry trail I found on a hiking forum that hasn't been updated since flip phones were a thing. She rolled her eyes, called me a hermit, and reminded me to text when I got back. It was late October. You know that stretch where the air isn't quite freezing, but every breeze has that dry bite to it? Like the woods are inhaling just before they go to sleep. The sky had that dull gray glaze that looks the same all day, like time's not really moving. I followed a deer trail at first, barely a footpath really, but it mirrored a dry stream bed, and I figured that was as good a guide as any. I didn't have a real destination, just a vague loop I'd mapped out by staring at satellite images and guessing which spots might be flat enough to sleep on without sliding downhill in the middle of the night. By the time the sun started dipping, I'd already veered off to the trail looking for a place to camp. I ended up on this narrow ridge that looked down into a huge hollow, bowl-shaped, thick with rhododendron and mountain laurel. The kind of place that swallows sound. I found a patch near the edge that was just flat enough to make it work. I cleared some deadfall, set up my tent, boiled water for one of those bagged meals that taste like warm cardboard with salt, and settled in for the night. That's when I saw it. About 10 feet down slope, just where the ridge began to level off into the hollow, there was this rectangular patch in the brush that didn't match anything around it. It wasn't natural, too straight, too symmetrical. I climbed down to check it out. It was a square. 4 low stone walls, just barely rising above the earth. Not big enough to be a building foundation, but too clean and deliberate to be random. At first, I thought maybe it was the remains of a tiny root cellar or spring box, stuff people used to build into hillsides. But there was no wood, no nails, no rust, no signs of decay. The rocks were packed tight, almost seamless, like they'd been placed recently and then forgotten. It didn't sit right. I climbed back up and sat by my tent, trying to focus on anything else. I chewed through my dinner, washed out the metal cup, and told myself it was probably nothing. But that square kept pressing in at the edge of my thoughts. Not just because it was strange. It was the kind of strange that felt deliberate. Not, "this is old strange." More like, "this isn't done yet." I went to sleep around midnight. The woods were silent, no crickets, no wind. Just that muffled quiet you only get far from everything. Then I heard the footsteps. Not running, not rushing, just walking. Crunch, pause, crunch. Through the leaves. Coming uphill. They stopped maybe 20 feet from the tent. I waited, thinking maybe it was a hunter or another hiker. Maybe someone is checking their gear. I held my breath, listening for a flashlight click or a cough or even a zipper. Nothing. Just total silence, like the entire forest was holding its breath. I didn't move. I didn't even shift in my sleeping bag. My hand found the little knife I kept near the mesh pocket, and I stayed like that, still and quiet, for what felt like an hour. Eventually, my body gave up and I drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember being awake and then not. When I opened the tent the next morning, the leaves looked untouched. No prints, no snapped twigs, no disturbed brush, everything exactly where it had been. And still, I didn't pack up. I went back down to the square. No plan. I just found myself kneeling there, brushing leaves aside. My fingers were digging before my brain had caught up. Right in the middle, under about 2 inches of dirt, I hit something hard. Metal. It was a hatch, square, rusted brown like old iron. No handle, just a round edge with a thin seam all the way around. My hand instinctively touched it. Cold, like metal that hadn't seen daylight in years. I knelt there staring, trying to come up with something reasonable. Some leftover cellar, a water tank lid, something. Then I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't mine. It wasn't some echo in my head. It was coming from under the hatch, slow, measured, like someone asleep, but deep, ragged. A breath pause, another breath. I stood, backed away slowly, without turning. My legs felt hollow. I didn't sprint. I didn't even look behind me. I just grabbed my pack and walked, uphill, controlled, pretending I wasn't shaking. I didn't touch the tent, didn't even look at it. I just left. That's when everything got weird. The deer trail was gone. The stream bed curved the wrong direction. Trees looked the same everywhere I turned. I pulled out my GPS, nothing, just spinning, searching, like it didn't know where I was anymore. I marked a tree, scratched a little cross into the bark with my knife, and walked straight for about 20 minutes. I ended up back at the same tree, same cut, fresh. That's when I saw the man. He was standing near the ridge, facing away, leaning slightly, like he was listening to something underground. He was tall, wearing this old green jacket that hung low on his frame, too long in the sleeves. I shouted, probably something stupid, angry, desperate. He didn't turn, just stood there, motionless. I took a step toward him. Then I saw it. His feet weren't touching the ground. He was hovering, just barely, maybe an inch. But enough. Enough to make every hair on my body stand up. And his coat, it wasn't just hanging. It was moving. Like something under it was breathing. Not in rhythm with the man. Something else, inside the coat. I turned and ran. No hesitation. I sprinted through the brush, tripped, slammed into trees, slid down mud banks. I didn't stop, didn't think. I followed a stream without knowing where it led. Eventually, I heard tires, the hum of rubber on pavement. And when I stumbled out onto the road, filthy and breathless, I waved down the first truck that passed. The driver looked at me like I'd been hit by a tree, asked if I was hurt. I told him my car broke down. It was all I could manage. A ranger took my statement the next day. Nice guy, patient. I showed him where I thought I'd gone in, but the road wasn't there. I booked the trip 3 months in advance. Just me, the Blue Ridge Mountains, 2 weeks off-grid, no deadline, no itinerary. I hadn't been back there since college, but something pulled me. I figured some serious solitude would clear my head. The first night was as peaceful as I'd hoped. I pitched the tent under a clear sky, the cold dirt pressed against my sleeping pad, and the only sounds were the usual. Leaves rustling, something small scampering overhead, the rhythm of my own breathing. No red flags, no reason to feel uneasy. Next morning, though, I unzipped the tent and froze. My boots were sitting just outside, lace-free. The laces were pulled right out, ends lying parallel on the ground, looking almost decorative, like ribbons placed with intention. A goofy prank, I thought at first. My mind half laughed, half rolled its eyes. But I stood there longer than I probably should have, questioning what the hell happened. I always double knot my boots. Habit. The night before, I must have done it as usual, tight and secure. I remember tucking the loops so they wouldn't catch on anything in the underbrush. Maybe I goofed? But no. My stomach clenched. I knew I hadn't forgotten. Later that morning, I passed a single person, the only other soul I spotted all day. Hiker looked mid-50s, gear that had seen countless miles, gray beard, worn trekking poles. I nodded. He stopped mid-stride, stared a beat too long, then said, "You heading toward Whistling Gap?" I said yes. He squinted at something behind me, maybe checking my pack or just sizing me up. Then, almost brusquely, he said, "Don't stray off the trail, you hear me?" He didn't wait for anything, just turned and walked off. I stood still, feeling the forest around me breathe. I chalked his warning up to old-timer paranoia, trail etiquette, or lost hiker caution, but it hit different. That night I camped on a flat, indistinct patch of forest. Nothing special, just dirt and trees and that overwhelming hush. The absence of sound felt dense, almost physical, as if the trees were crowding in. When morning came, I found the note, a single line of pencil writing wedged under a rock near my bare fire pit. "You passed it last night." No folding, no envelope, just that. My pulse jumped. I scanned around hard. No footprints, no broken branches, no evidence of another person passing by. Whatever placed the note had left no trail. I ate half a granola bar and skipped the fire. Better to stay mobile. Midway through the day, I slipped off the trail. It wasn't dramatic, just a moment's inattention while I admired a view. But I stepped into something off. The trees looked too uniform. Sunlight filtered oddly. Patches of ground looked unnaturally clear, like I'd wandered into a staged set. I backtracked until I saw the familiar blaze and then noticed the claw marks. 4 deep gouges ripped into the tree bark, clean and ragged. They weren't old, not carved by hand. They looked torn, violent, alive. That night I reached Whistling Gap, or the spot marked on my map. There was no gap, no breeze funneling through. Instead, I found a ruined stone chimney half buried in moss, trees pressing in tight around it. I pitched camp beside it, kept the headlamp low, and let my pack lean against the chimney stones like I was claiming sanctuary. I woke sometime before midnight. Not fully, just enough to notice the sound. Slow, irregular shuffling, like someone dragging something heavy. My breath hitched. I froze. Then something pressed against the tent wall. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal snuffling. It felt purposeful, like a hand gliding along the fabric, pausing, tracing the curve of the tent. It made a slow circuit and vanished. Morning light revealed my pack 10 feet away, standing on its own. Every item removed and arranged around it in a nearly perfect circle. Toothbrush, lighter, water purification tablet, a half-crushed candy wrapper, everything ordered, cataloged, assessed. My heart sank. Whatever had touched my pack wasn't in a hurry, it was aware. I stuffed things back haphazardly, no breakfast, no water. I slung the pack over one shoulder and just started walking again. By late morning, I stumbled over something buried in the trail. I braced to fall and realized I was stepping on a boot. My boot. Left one, caked in dirt, scuffed just where the toe meets the sole. But here's the thing. I was wearing it. My pulse spiked. I knelt, untied my boot to double check. It was real, on my foot. Then I peered inside the other boot. Another note. The other one's still with us. I dropped the note. Maybe I didn't want to hold on to it too long. Maybe I felt like someone, something, was watching through it. I started running without thinking, just burst forward until the trail widened and opened to a rocky overlook. My legs shook, my lungs burned, but for the first time in days, I could see far. Green hills stretching away like they might lead me home. I collapsed near a boulder, didn't set up camp, didn't even unzip the pack. I pressed my cheek to the rock and tried to breathe slow. I didn't close my eyes, but I didn't fight the shadows either. That night, I heard movement again. Not footfalls, something too slick and deliberate, like fabric brushing, or someone breathing just beyond what was visible. At dawn, I dropped down the slope. No trail, just instinct. I stumbled onto a stream, followed it downhill, and eventually hit a dirt service road. Tire tracks were clear enough. I waited until a maintenance truck came by, around 10 a.m., I'd guess. The driver saw me, pulled over without hesitation. Open the Ned the door, gestured inside. I told them I twisted my ankle and got off route. They didn't pry, gave me water, a blanket, and directed me to the ranger station. At home, I tossed everything. Tent, pack, boots, gone. Sold, donated, discarded. I wanted it all away. 2 days later, a package without a label or stamp sat by my front door. Inside was the boot, left side, the missing one. I immediately chucked it in the dumpster behind the apartment. My sister had just gotten engaged and I pretended to be thrilled. We were at some small Italian place in Portwell, white tablecloths, waiters in bow ties, the whole deal. I raised my glass when she made the announcement, smiled at her fiancé, said all the right things. But underneath, something in me just folded, quietly. We'd always been close. The kind of close where you finish each other's sentences, share bank passwords, get mistaken for twins even though we don't look alike. Same school, same major, same weird obsession with true crime documentaries and chili cheese fries. Living together since college. All of that. Then, out of nowhere, she was planning a life I wasn't part of. Guest lists, venue scouting, brunches with people I'd never met. It felt like I'd blinked and been demoted. Not exactly cut out, but gently edged toward the border of her new life. I didn't want to be petty, but the feeling stuck. I told her I needed a few days to myself. No drama, no hard feelings, just some time to think. I made it sound like personal growth, introspective. She gave me a hug and said she understood. I left at 4 a.m. 2 days later. There's this stretch of the Blue Ridge I'd been meaning to hike for a while, off the usual loop, past a shuttered ranger station near a place called Carson Ridge. Not a popular spot. I figured I'd do 2 nights out, a long loop around the lower ridge trails, and come back feeling clear-headed. It wasn't the kind of trip you invited company on. I wanted to feel anonymous for a while, disappear into the trees. I didn't leave an itinerary. I didn't text anyone. Not because I was being reckless. I brought my GPS and a PLB in case something went wrong, but I didn't want to explain myself. I just wanted quiet. It was October. Crisp air, crunchy leaves, that sweet spot where the cold hasn't settled in yet, but the bugs are mostly gone. I parked next to the old ranger shack, paint peeling, windows boarded, and set off up the trail with nobody in sight. That first day was good. Better than good. I covered a lot of ground. The elevation changes were sharp but manageable. I passed 2 campsites, both empty, and kept moving until I found this wide bend in the trail right before dusk. The spot was almost too perfect. Level ground, soft pine needles, natural windbreak from some old stumps. No sound but my own steps, not even birdsong. I pitched my tent, filtered water from a slow-moving creek, and ate rice straight from the pot. No distractions, just the hollow stillness of woods that didn't care about anything happening back in Portwell. I lay down early and drifted off almost instantly. Slept hard, deep, and uninterrupted. Until the next morning. As I packed up, something caught the corner of my eye. A thin line of twine, barely there, stretched between 2 trees, maybe 15 yards off the trail. It was strung low, around thigh height, and angled gently down toward a slope that dropped off into brush. At first I thought it was trash, like someone had hung a clothesline and left it behind. But when I got a bit closer, maybe 6 feet away, I saw it wasn't loose. It was pulled taut, deliberately tied, fresh, not weathered or sagging like it had been there a while. It wasn't mine, and it definitely wasn't there when I'd set up camp the night before. I stood there for a good minute staring at it, not sure why it creeped me out so much. It didn't do anything. It wasn't moving, but it felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to be there and I wasn't supposed to notice it. Eventually, I backed away and kept hiking. The trail narrowed as I climbed, trees tighter, ridgeline steeper. Visibility dropped. I kept scanning the woods without meaning to, listening for anything. There was nothing, not even a squirrel rustle, just that. The gut-deep silence that makes your ears ring after a while. A couple hours in, I spotted another piece of twine. This one was different. It wasn't stretched or tied across anything. It was just looped neatly around a tree, maybe 4 feet up the trunk. No knot, just hanging there, like someone had coiled it around and let it dangle. I stood there longer this time. It didn't look like trash. It wasn't random. It was too precise. And the twine itself looked new, clean. No signs of wear, no fading from sun or rain. Like someone had walked through earlier that morning and placed it there. My stomach went tight. I kept going, but I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. Not in a paranoid, monsters in the dark kind of way. Just this low thrum of attention. Like someone had been walking ahead of me, just out of sight, leaving breadcrumbs. By early afternoon, I reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a dried creek. Good view, narrow access points. I set up camp there, more for defense than comfort. I positioned the tent facing the trail. No cooking, no wandering, just sat there back against the stone, watching the tree line with my knife laid flat beside me. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up. No noise, no animals. Just sudden, rigid awareness. I felt soaked in cold sweat. Couldn't hear anything, no wind, no insects. My chest was pounding like I'd been running. I reached for the zipper with one hand, knife with the other, and opened the flap just an inch. Waited. Then I stepped out barefoot, crouched low behind the tent. I didn't use my flashlight, just let the moonlight pick out the edges of rocks and branches. That's when I saw him. About 40 feet away. A man, standing dead still between two trees. Back to me. Arms down, like he was just resting. His head was tilted, just slightly, as if he was listening to the ground. No backpack, no hiking poles, no light, just him. He didn't turn, didn't shift, didn't move. I didn't make a sound, didn't then breathe right. Then, after what felt like a full minute, he stepped forward into the trees and vanished. I sat in the tent the rest of the night, gripping that knife with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My mouth was dry. Every creak of fabric felt like thunder. I didn't blink until the sky started to go gray. At first light, I packed up and left, fast. No food, no water refill. Just gone. I should have followed the trail, but instead I cut east, straight over the ridge, scrambling through underbrush to make a shortcut back. It wasn't smart, but I didn't want to be on the same path anymore. Everything looked suspicious. Every flick of a branch felt like movement. I kept my head on a swivel, legs burning, chest tight. Around noon, I stopped for maybe 30 seconds to catch my breath. That's when I saw the third one. Twine, stretched across the trail again, this time with black feathers tied to it, small, delicate things spaced perfectly apart. They fluttered like they'd just been hung. I didn't go near it, just angled wide around, not touching anything. 30 minutes later, I spotted boot prints in the soft dirt just off the trail, larger than mine, deeper, spaced too far apart for a casual stroll. Whoever made them wasn't on the trail. They were pacing me, following alongside. I didn't stop again. When I reached the ranger station, I ran the last half-mile, jammed the key in the ignition so hard I nearly bent it. The car started immediately. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But right before I shifted into drive, I caught movement in the rearview mirror. A strip of twine tied to my antenna, with one single black feather spinning gently at the end. I didn't scream. I just pulled out and drove until I hit signs of life. I still hike. I still love being outside, but I never go alone now, and I don't go anywhere near Carson Ridge. I was 37 when I decided to get away for a weekend, so I booked a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Found it through this quiet little listing my brother forwarded. He'd stayed there once on a hiking trip. It sounded perfect. No Wi-Fi, no service, no TV, not even a proper driveway. The cabin looked like a box someone forgot about. Wood siding grayed with age, a sagging roof line, one tiny porch with a chair that didn't look safe to sit on. But I liked it. It felt real, honest. The kind of place that doesn't ask you to pretend to be doing okay. Inside, it was stripped down, but solid. One twin bed, a propane heater in the corner, a dry sink, and a rough wooden table with one drawer. No art on the walls, no mirror, no distractions. That drawer held a beat-up spiral notebook. Someone had labeled the cover in pencil, April to June. I figured it was a trail log or a guest journal. You see those sometimes, people jotting down what they saw, if they saw a bear, what trails were clear, that sort of thing. And yeah, at first that's exactly what it was. I flipped through casually, dates, weather notes, stuff like April 29th, fire didn't catch, rained all night, or May 6th, weird bird song before sunrise. Nothing strange. But then, near the back, the tone changed. One entry from mid-May read, "Saw him again, up the ridge, same shirt." Then, closer this morning, thought it was a deer until it stood. And that was it. No signature, just a blank page after that. I remember staring at that last line for a minute, not really sure what to make of it. It could have been someone messing around, cabin guests trying to spook the next person. But the handwriting didn't seem performative. It wasn't dramatic, just blunt. I closed the notebook and left it in the drawer, told myself not to overthink it. That afternoon, I did a long hike out to Fenner's Drop. It was supposed to be 5 miles out and back, but the trail was more gnarly than I expected. After mile 4, it basically turned into a spiderweb of roots and moss-slick stone. Still, it was beautiful in that untouched kind of way. No trash, no signage, just wind and trees and the occasional squirrel that darted off like I'd caught it stealing. By the time I got back to the cabin, my legs were aching and my shirt was stuck to me. I cooked some canned soup on the propane burner, listened to the creaks of the structure settling into the cold, and went to bed early. At some point past midnight, I woke up needing to pee. The kind of wake-up where you try to ignore it, but your bladder has other plans. I grabbed the flashlight, unlatched the door, and stepped out into the night. I didn't go far. Just off the porch, a few steps into the brush. Enough privacy for a quick bathroom break. As I was finishing, I heard a sound. Leaves shifting. Not like something scurrying, not quick and random like a raccoon. It was slower, rhythmic. Something, or someone, moving deliberately through dry undergrowth. I froze. The flashlight was still in my hand, so I raised it and swept the beam toward the sound. That's when I saw him. Uphill, maybe 20 yards away, standing completely still between 2 thin poplar trees. He was tall and narrow, shoulders sloped slightly forward. From that distance, I couldn't make out his face, couldn't even tell if he had one. But what struck me was the way he wasn't doing anything. No reaction, no shift in posture, just there. I said without thinking, "Hey." It came out more curious than confrontational, just a human instinct to acknowledge another presence. Nothing. No movement. No response. I backed up slowly, keeping the flashlight on him, climbed onto the porch, slipped inside, locked the door behind me. Then I just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, barely blinking until sunlight began to creep through the window slats. The next morning I tried to logic my way through it. Told myself it could have been a poacher, maybe another hiker camping where they shouldn't be. But deep down, I didn't buy that. Something about the way he stood there. It didn't feel like a person trying to stay hidden. It felt like he wanted to be seen. I decided to go back up the ridge behind the cabin, just to see. When I reached the spot where I thought he'd been standing, there were no footprints, which I told myself wasn't weird. The ground was mostly moss. But right where he'd been, there was a plastic water bottle standing straight up in the moss. The label had been peeled off, not torn, peeled. I hadn't brought it. Back in the cabin, I reopened the notebook. I was sure the last thing I'd seen in there was that line about "until it stood." But now there were more pages, same handwriting, tight, slanted, all lowercase. No dates, just one sentence. He watches closer if you don't move. I stared at it until the lines on the page started to blur. Then I shut the notebook hard, left it on the table and didn't touch it again. That night, I kept the lights off. Didn't bother with the flashlight, just sat in the dark on the bed, window cracked open, staring out toward the trees. At some point after 3, though I wasn't checking, he came back. This time he wasn't standing. He was crouched low, just at the edge of the trees, maybe 10 feet from the porch. His arms hung down too far, not dramatically so, just off, like his limbs didn't know where to stop. His neck was tilted to one side, as if he were curious, or broken. I could see his hands. The fingers were long, too long. They didn't look like gloves or tricks of the light. They looked like someone had drawn hands but kept going. I didn't move, didn't even swallow. We just stayed like that, staring. Eventually the blackness began to lift, the kind of slow, bruised dawn that barely counts as light. That's when he turned. Not fast, just rotated, stood, and walked calmly into the trees. I didn't hesitate. I shoved everything into my bag, left the notebook, started the car and drove down that old road. The trail wasn't labeled, but I followed it anyway. It was somewhere around mile 7 on the Letcher Ridge spur, just past the second creek crossing where the water ran slow and brown over slick rocks, when I noticed a narrow path veering left. No signpost or marker, just a break in the brush where the leaves were tamped down like someone or something had been through recently. I stood there for a minute, listening, nothing but birds and the breeze through trees. I checked my topo map, no mention of it. But I'd read on forums that hikers sometimes found old fire roads, forgotten cutoff routes that snaked through the forest. It looked like one of those. And I mean, what was the worst that could happen? This was my 3rd solo trip. I'd done everything right. 4-day plan, gear checked twice, all food sealed, routes marked out. I wasn't out there to prove anything. I wasn't looking for thrills. I just needed a break from people, from roommates who never stopped yelling, from group texts that lit up at 2 a.m., from expectations I didn't ask for. I wanted silence, space, time to breathe and let my shoulders drop. The morning had been solid, crisp air, birds doing their thing, a few squirrels darting along branches above. Every once in a while I'd catch a glimpse of a deer slipping away before I could even raise my head fully. The usual, familiar, grounding. So when I saw the offshoot trail and realized I was ahead of schedule, I thought, sure, I had time, no rush. The tread looked worn, more like a narrow service path than a game trail. I figured I'd follow it for an hour, maybe find a nice overlook, then loop back. If it didn't connect anywhere, I'd just retrace my steps. Easy, but it didn't stay easy. After about 2 hours of climbing, something felt wrong. I wasn't sure at first. It was subtle. The trees around me were all spaced the same distance apart, evenly lined like they'd been planted, not grown. And the incline under my boots didn't feel right. I'd been watching the elevation on my topo, and this didn't match. It should have plateaued by now, but it just kept climbing. I stopped and checked my compass. North had shifted. It wasn't behind me anymore. It pointed sharply to my right. I turned slowly, trying to reorient, telling myself it was probably magnetic interference. Could have been minerals in the rock, maybe iron deposits. The rational part of my brain clung to that. I shook the compass, tapped it, waited. Same reading. Still, I pushed on. Maybe it was just a weird patch and I'd get through it soon. That's when I saw the log. A thick, rotting trunk lay half-sunken beside the trail. It had split down the center, clean and long, like it had been struck or peeled, and inside the hollowed space, I noticed an old soda can. It was rusted, almost fused into the wood, but the pull tab was still attached. The label had faded to pale red and silver. It was so specific it stuck in my mind. I walked past it. 20 minutes later, I walked past it again. Same trunk, same split, same half-buried soda can. I stopped cold, looked around. The path hadn't forked. I hadn't turned around. But somehow, I'd looped back. Or something had turned me back without me realizing it. That's when I started to feel it, the dread. It didn't hit like a thunderclap. It slid in, slow and cold, like mist. I tried to keep calm, tried to be methodical. I sat down, pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. GPS showed my location as a blinking blue dot in the middle of a gray void. No trail lines, just space. And then the coordinates flickered. First it showed me here, then 2 miles east, then right back again. I shut off the phone and dug out the compass. The needle spun slowly, not fast, just lazy loops, like it was too tired to choose a direction. That's when I noticed something down the slope. About 50 yards off, in a little hollow where the trees dipped, I saw the cabin. It looked like it had been there forever. Just one story, maybe 20 feet across, the roof sagging in the middle. Moss had overtaken the shingles. The windows looked empty, just black holes cut into the wood, and the porch steps had collapsed inward. And the front door? Open. Not swung wide, just cracked a few inches, enough to see darkness beyond. I froze at the edge of the clearing. Every instinct screamed not to go near it, but I was low on water and I thought, maybe there was something in there. An old supply stash, a jug, a radio, anything that might explain where the hell I was and how to get back. So I walked toward it. The air felt heavy. Not in a dramatic way, more like the weight you feel before a bad conversation. One of the porch steps gave under my foot and I nearly went down, caught myself on the post. The door didn't creak. It swung open silently. Inside was a single room. Cot on the left wall, cast iron stove in the corner, small table, 3 wooden chairs. A pair of boots sat by the door, crusted with dried mud. A chipped ceramic mug sat on the table, still holding a ring of old coffee like it had been set down minutes ago. The whole place was too clean. Not spotless, but intentional. Like someone had tidied up and just stepped out for a moment. I called out, voice dry. Hello? Nothing. I stepped inside. The floor didn't creak, but the air smelled like mildew and rust. My eyes kept drifting back to the boots. One was slightly tilted, like it had just been pulled off. I turned to leave. The door clicked shut behind me. Not hard, just a soft sound, like someone pulling it closed carefully. I opened it again. No one was there. The trees looked the same, still. I didn't even hesitate. I left the cabin behind and kept moving, pushing through underbrush and branches. I stopped caring about direction. I just knew I had to keep walking. Moonlight slipped through the trees, but I barely noticed. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, barely audible, just one every few seconds, always just to my right. I stopped. They stopped. I moved. They moved. Not fast, not loud, just steady. Like someone walking barefoot through leaves, making no sound except the pressure. I called out again. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, one step, closer, heavy. I took off. Branches tore at my arms. I tripped once, slammed into the ground, rolled, scrambled up again. I ran until my lungs screamed, until my legs barely worked. And then I stopped, bent over, hands on my knees, breath coming in harsh, uneven gasps. And when I looked up, the cabin, again. Same porch, same roof, same door, cracked open just like before. But this time, the boots were gone. I didn't go near it. I didn't even stop to look. I turned the opposite direction and walked. At the time, it felt like the only real thing I had left. I was down in this hollow, crouched behind a splintered stump with something not right coming straight toward me. And in that exact moment, when everything else had stopped making sense, my name was the only thing keeping me tethered to something human. Like if I could just hold on to that one word, maybe I could keep the rest of myself from slipping away. It had started like 100 other weekend hunts. My cousin Theo had heard about a stretch of forest near Harper's Notch that hadn't been logged or developed or even marked properly in decades. He was always chasing places like that. Called them quiet land, which in Theo speak meant spots that gave off the kind of vibe most people would steer clear of. No paths, no markers, no cell signal. Just dense green walls and ground that felt like it forgot it was supposed to support weight. He lived for that stuff. I usually came along to make sure he didn't die doing it. Theo had his trusty machete and a compass that probably came from some military surplus crate older than both of us. I had the rifle. Just one between us. We didn't have tags, and we weren't looking to bring anything back anyway. Theo's rule was simple. If we spot it, we leave it. If it spots us, we leave faster. We drove out early that Saturday morning. The access road was one of those rough gravel stretches that make you nervous about your suspension. As we climbed higher into the mountains, I noticed this layer of cloud just sitting there like a lid pressed down on the ridges. I almost kept driving past the ranger shack. We usually did. But something about the low fog and the way the trees seemed to lean made me pull over. The woman inside didn't say much, but there was something about her that made me pay attention. She was older, tough-looking, like someone who didn't bother with small talk, unless it mattered. I asked about trail conditions, mostly to make conversation, but then she looked at our map, grabbed a red pen and said, "Avoid this zone here, especially near the western cut slope." It's been weird. Her pause made it worse. She didn't explain, just circled some spots and added, almost as an afterthought, "Odd bear movement lately. One sighting was off. Big. Unpredictable." I glanced at Theo. He was already itching to go. I thanked her, tucked the map into my jacket, and we left. The trail at first was beautiful. Nothing eerie or dramatic, just steep ridgelines, pine needles underfoot, and that distant quiet that only comes when you're too far out for traffic or people. After an hour or so, the fog started drifting in lower. It didn't come all at once, more like a slow creep that filtered through the trees and settled on our jackets. It made the world feel muffled, smaller. That's when we stopped seeing trail markers. At first I thought maybe we just missed one. It happens. You're talking, moving, not paying close attention. But then another half-mile went by and there was still nothing. I pulled out the compass, checked our direction, then checked it again. "Shouldn't we be climbing?" I asked. Theo looked around, tilted his head. "Huh, Feels like we're dipping, yeah. We stood there for a moment, both of us trying to match the land with the topography on the map. Something wasn't adding up. The terrain had shifted, subtly but enough to notice. The ridge was supposed to be climbing, yet it felt like we were slowly drifting downhill. Not like a drop, just wrong. "Backtrack," I said. Theo nodded. We turned around and started retracing our steps. Only what we found behind us wasn't what we'd walked through. There was this tight grove of ash trees I remembered passing, a little pocket where the undergrowth cleared and the ground got crunchy, but it wasn't there anymore, just more pine. Different layout, like we'd veered left without realizing. We hadn't. Trail markers were still missing. The air was heavier now, not in a storm-coming kind of way, just thick. Then I saw them. Prints. Huge, wide, padded tracks pressed deep into the damp ground. Not bear. I'd tracked bears before. These were elongated, more like a wolf's, but oversized. Easily the length of my forearm. No blur around the edges either. Still crisp, still fresh. I crouched down and put my fingers near one of the pads, still damp underneath. Whatever made those prints had been there minutes ago, maybe less. Theo hadn't said a word. He was scanning the woods, lips tight, shoulders set. Finally he muttered, "Too clean, too close." After that, we didn't talk, just kept walking, slower now, eyes sweeping the tree line. Maybe 10 minutes later, we found the deer. It was lying about 15 feet off what used to be the trail, curled into a little depression of moss and leaves like it had tucked itself in for a nap. Except it wasn't sleeping. It was dead, but not in any way I'd seen before. No blood, no wounds, no signs of panic. Its legs were stiff, angled like it had frozen mid-step, eyes wide open, glassy. No flies, no scavenger marks. Hell, not even a single crow in the sky. It looked staged, like something had placed it there, like a warning or maybe bait. I flicked the safety off my rifle. Theo dropped into a crouch, hands twitching. He kept glancing toward the tree line, almost like he could hear something I couldn't. I was about to say something when I felt it. This low shift in pressure, like the air around us had started humming without making sound. Then I actually heard it. Not breathing, not a growl, just this low, warping throb, like a noise that had forgotten how to be a noise, wet and vibrating. I opened my mouth to speak. Theo turned fast and yelled, "Run!" He didn't have to say it twice. It stepped out behind him. At first it looked like a bear, big, hulking. But then its limbs unfolded too far. Its shoulder blades jutted up like knives and its legs bent wrong. The fur wasn't right either, patchy, matted, clinging to the muscle like it had melted there, and the eyes, no reflection, just pits. I fired. The shot cracked and echoed, kicking up leaves. It flinched, just a little, then turned its head slowly toward me. I ran. I barely remember the route I took. It was just trees and motion and noise. Branches snapped behind me. Heavy ones. Fast. I tripped over a root and hit the dirt hard, rifle flying from my hands. Pain shot up my ribs. I scrambled, dragging myself toward the weapon. When I rolled over, it was there. It didn't leap. It stretched, like it was folding itself across the space between us. Its mouth opened, not sideways. Downward, deep, like it went farther than it should. I shoved the rifle up into its jaws. It bit down, and I felt the steel bend against my hands. My ribs buckled under its weight. One of them cracked. I felt it go. But the bolt was still reachable. I racked it, chambered another round, pulled the trigger. It collapsed, dropped like someone cut its strings. No final breath, no death rattle, just hit the ground, mouth still open around the crushed barrel. I shoved out from under it and crawled backward until I slammed into a tree. I sat there breathing in these short, tight gasps, eyes locked on its unmoving body. Theo found me a minute later, pale, wild-eyed. "Was that a bear?" he asked. I couldn't answer, not right away. I wanted to say yes, I really, really did. But it wasn't. We walked out, didn't say a word the whole time. I filed a report, told them it was a black bear, probably sick or injured. They took it seriously. No one asked too many questions. But now I kept the rifle with me. My friend Nate owns a handful of rustic cabins tucked into a barely charted patch of the Blue Ridge Mountains. They're off a remote section of the parkway, the kind of road that looks like it was built just to stop existing halfway through. You wouldn't find them unless you already knew they were there. Just word of mouth and a hand-drawn map Nate keeps in his glove compartment. He calls it the retreat, which sounds kind of dramatic until you actually get there. The guests he usually gets aren't your typical vacation crowd, mostly wilderness therapists, hardcore birders, or folks trying to unplug in a serious way. The kind of people who delete their social media and bring their own drinking water. That February, 2 guests canceled last minute. Nate knew I was dragging my way through a rough patch, newly divorced, sleeping on a friend's couch, the whole mess. So he offered me a weekend for free. No signal, no screens, no noise, he said. Just woods and time. Honestly, I didn't even hesitate. I packed light, a cooler with groceries, 1 backpack, a paperback I'd started twice, and another I brought for guilt. I figured I'd get some peace, maybe sit on a porch and pretend I had my life together. The first hour, there was exactly what I needed. The road ended in a gravel loop with cabins spaced just far enough apart that you couldn't hear your neighbors even if you screamed. Mine was a single-room log cabin with a little front porch overlooking a steep turn in the mountain. The trees were winter bare, and the whole place had this untouched feel, like nobody had walked through in weeks, maybe months. The air tasted clean, but heavy, like rain that never came. I sat on the porch with a beer and let my brain run quiet. For the first time in a long time, nothing felt urgent. There was no Wi-Fi, no bars, not even an FM station. I liked it. But right around 10 p.m., while ooshing my teeth in the tiny bathroom, I heard something scrape across the porch. Not leaves, not a squirrel. It was deliberate. A long, slow drag across wood like claws or metal, something that didn't belong out there. I froze, toothbrush halfway up, listening. I waited a solid minute. Nothing else happened. I figured maybe a branch had fallen and rolled, or maybe something weird about the wind. I finally stepped outside to check. Nothing was there, but one of the porch chairs had moved. Just one. It used to face out over the bend in the road. Now it was angled toward the woods, not fully turned, just off enough that I noticed, like someone had sat down, looked left, and forgot to put it back. I stood there a while, no sounds, no footsteps in the gravel, no rustling. I chalked it up to me bumping it earlier or something dumb like that and went back inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie still, and it felt like something, or someone, was outside the window. I never saw anything, but every time I turned over, I got that weird, tight feeling in my chest like I was being watched, like something was waiting for me to open the blinds. My eyes stayed on the ceiling most of the night. The next morning, I stepped outside to air the place out and nearly tripped. There were clumps of hair on the porch steps. Not fur. Hair. Black, thick, curled at the ends. I crouched and touched one. It felt like wire, coarse and brittle, not the kind of thing you'd pull off a dog or raccoon. There were 5 or 6 tufts, all spaced out like they'd been left there, not shed naturally. Then I saw the drag marks. They started at the steps and cut across the gravel path straight into the trees. Not footprints, not wheel tracks. Just 2 shallow lines like something heavy had been dragged through the dirt, something without legs or something that didn't use them. I didn't call Nate. I didn't really do anything. I just stared at the marks for a while, then turned back inside. Told myself it was probably a bear. Maybe it brushed against the railing and lost some fur. Maybe it had killed something and was hauling it away, plausible enough to keep me from packing up right then. That afternoon, I figured I'd get some distance and clear my head. Nate had circled a few hiking trails on a laminated trail map he left in a drawer. I picked the shortest loop, supposed to lead to a lookout point and swing back down behind the cabins. 15 minutes in, it already felt off. The trail narrowed too fast. The trees got dense in a way they hadn't been lower down. It was like stepping from one kind of forest into another entirely. I kept going until I hit a fork in the trail that didn't match the map. The left side was gone, just thick brush, and the right side veered into a clearing that looked wrong. No grass, no leaves, just bare soil and flat stone in an oval shape, like something had been lying there, pressing it down. There were no animals, no insects, not even wind. It was just quiet. I stood there not moving for maybe 10 seconds. Then I heard something shift in the trees. A heavy, slow movement, just far enough back that I couldn't see what made it. A branch snapped. I didn't turn around. I stepped backward slowly, then turned and took the long trail back, the one I knew ended behind the cabins. I didn't stop walking until I saw the roof of mine through the trees. That night, it came back. The porch creaked, once, then again, slower each time, like someone was taking their time with each step. I didn't look. I turned off every light, crawled into bed in my clothes, and held the small folding knife I'd used earlier to slice open a block of cheese. Around 3 a.m. I heard it. Not movement, a voice. It said my name. Not whispered, not shouted. Just said it plainly, like someone calling you from another room, trying to sound normal. I opened the door. The footprints were back. Not human, wide, long, no clear heel, no visible toes, just soft, padded impressions stretching across the porch to the edge, then disappearing into the woods. They looked like oversized paw prints, but wrong. Off in a way I couldn't explain. When I stepped back inside, one of the chairs in the living room, just a simple wooden one near the door, had turned. It now faced the front door just slightly, like it had been waiting for me to come back in. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I checked the back of the cabin. I hadn't even thought about that door since arriving. I hadn't touched it. But part of the wooden frame was carved up, just a square, about the size of a license plate, not broken or smashed, just methodically picked at, layer by layer, like something had been testing the structure, seeing how it gave. That was it. I packed up in 10 minutes, didn't even brush my teeth, left the keys on the table, didn't lock the door. I wasn't worried about theft. On the way out, just before the trail met the gravel lot, I saw it. Standing right there in the middle of the path. Still, waiting. It had to be over 7 feet tall, covered head to toe in black fur but not messy like an animal's. Smooth, uniform, like it grew that way on purpose. Its arms were long, too long, hanging down past its knees. The legs bent backward, hinged like a rabbit's or a deer's, but it stood upright. The head was narrow and triangular, like the front half of a shovel, with 2 wide-set eyes that didn't blink. No mouth, just those eyes. It didn't move. Neither did I. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I took 3 steps backward, slow and steady, until the path curved. Then I turned and walked. Not fast, just away. I didn't stop until I reached my car and heard the key click in the ignition. I drove until I found a gas station with lights and noise and signal. I didn't stop anywhere else. I was 24 when it happened. My uncle owned this big, forgotten stretch of forest out near the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It had been in our family for a while, passed down, largely ignored. He used to lease it to hunters every fall, but that fizzled out years ago. Still, the land was his, and he wanted to keep it marked. That's why he asked me to go out there for a month, just long enough to reflag the boundaries, repaint some of the faded signs, and open up a few trails that had been swallowed by undergrowth. He offered to pay, but I didn't need convincing. I was coming off a mess of a roommate situation and hadn't slept a full night in weeks. No noise, no phone signal, no awkward run-ins in the kitchen. I was all in. There was one structure on the property, if you could call it that, an old hunting cabin that hadn't seen maintenance in at least a decade. Just one small room, a sagging porch with boards like brittle teeth, and a roof that made new noises depending on which way the wind came from. No electricity, no plumbing. The door didn't even latch right. I had to tie it shut at night using a loop of climbing rope I threaded through the knob and wrapped around a porch post. Inside there was a cot with cracked vinyl padding, a few rust-stained pots hanging on the wall, and a stack of yellowed maps that were probably outdated the day they were printed. I set up my lantern on a metal crate near the cot and kept a duffel of supplies next to me, just the essentials. Batteries, canned food, a couple books, and a handheld radio I used to check in with my uncle once a day when I hiked up high enough to catch a signal. At night, I'd switch on the little battery lantern. It had this distinctive mechanical click when you turned the dial to power it down, and for some reason, I started to really depend on that click. If I didn't hear it, I'd get this weird feeling like maybe time had slipped past me without asking permission. The first week felt like exactly what I needed. I cleared a good path down from the ridge to the East Creek, chopped back a few stubborn thorn bushes, and found most of the old boundary signs still hanging by a nail or two. Repainting them gave me something tangible to focus on. Every evening I sat on the porch with my coffee, felt the cool air settle in, and watched the trees go still. On the fifth morning, I wasn't even dressed yet, just boots and thermal pants, holding a half-full metal cup, when I caught movement off to the right, maybe 50 feet into the trees. A woman, just walking. She came in from the direction of the ridge, cutting across a shallow trail I hadn't cleared yet. She wore a long canvas coat that flapped gently as she moved. Her pace was steady, casual almost, like she was headed somewhere but wasn't in any rush. Her hair was short, cut sharp at the edges, and she didn't have a pack, water, anything. Just boots and that coat. What hit me hardest was how quiet it was. I didn't hear her coming. No twigs snapping, no brush parting. She just passed through. I don't even think she saw me. She never looked up. I stood there long after she was gone, staring at the place where she'd vanished between two oaks. I didn't even realize until later that I hadn't heard a single footstep. The stillness after she disappeared was thick. Not silent, just still, like the woods were watching and waiting for something to happen. That was the first moment my stomach twisted a little. That night, I turned the lantern on like usual. Sat on the cot reading a water-stained paperback. I don't even remember falling asleep. But I woke up in pitch dark. The lantern hadn't died. It was off. That click I always listened for, it hadn't happened. I sat straight up, breathing shallow, ears straining. Then I heard it. Footsteps. 2 steps. Then nothing. Another 2. Slow. Purposeful. Like someone circling the cabin just a few feet from the wall. Not crunching through leaves, too close for that. More like shoes brushing against dirt and rotted pine needles. I didn't move. My hatchet was maybe 3 feet away, leaned against the crate, but I couldn't risk the sound. I didn't even shift my weight. Then, from just outside the window, I heard a voice. "You awake?" It was me. My voice. No question about it. The exact tone I'd used on the radio earlier that day. Same scratch at the end, like my throat was still dry from the hike. It didn't sound like an imitation. It sounded recorded, but not quite. "You awake?" It said it again, but this time it strained, like someone was trying to get the shape of the words right and failing. I didn't answer. I just stared into the dark, fists clenched tight against my legs. The voice stopped. Then I heard the rope on the door twitch, just once, like someone had gently tugged it, testing it. And then nothing. I stayed sitting up for the rest of the night. By dawn, my eyes were dry, my back ached, but I didn't care. I opened the door slowly and walked the clearing in a wide circle. No footprints, nothing disturbed. Until I got to the back side of the cabin. That's where I found them. At first glance, they looked like animal tracks, wide pads, 4 toes, long drag marks like claws. But the spacing was off. They weren't staggered like an animal's gait. They were symmetrical, clean circles around the cabin, like something had been pacing in perfect loops. I grabbed my gear and set up the trail cams. 4 total, 1 on the ridge near the quarry, 1 by the east creek, 1 near the south boundary, and 1 right up close to the cabin. Each was mounted at head height, angled to catch any movement. And every morning, I'd hike out and check them. 3 nights went by with nothing but deer, a raccoon, and a really confused turkey. Then came night 4. At 3:11 a.m., the quarry cam caught something. The clip started normal, leaves rustling in a breeze I never felt. Then, movement. A tall figure stepped into frame, easily 6.5 feet, maybe taller, thin to the point of looking fragile, no visible features, just this towering silhouette that didn't match any animal or person I've ever seen. It moved slowly, stiff joints bending the wrong way. Then it dropped to all 4s. And when it did, the movement was off. The way the limbs bent outward instead of folding at elbows and knees, it looked reversed, like it had learned walking secondhand. Then it crawled backward, slow and jerky, out of frame. Its head was still turned toward the camera. I deleted the clip, smashed the camera against a flat rock until the casing split. The pieces are still out there, probably. From that night on, I didn't go out after dark. I sealed the door with the rope and a chain from my pack. I slept during the day, stayed up at night with the lantern lit beside me, batteries replaced before they ever dipped below half. 3 nights later, just past 2, I heard it again. Help. This time a woman's voice, high, thin, breaking a little like she'd been screaming too long. Help, please. The voice moved, circled the cabin, east, then south, then back again. The words didn't change. No panic, no escalation, just the same line on repeat. But it wasn't a recording. The pitch shifted too much, like someone trying to hold it steady and failing. Then silence. About 5 minutes later, I heard breathing. Not from the side, from above. It was on the roof. No footsteps, no shifting weight. Just breathing. Heavy, wet, like lungs weren't made for air. It didn't move. Didn't grow louder or fade. It just stayed there, constant. I didn't blink for hours. When the sun finally crept in through the cracks in the wall, I grabbed my bag and left. I didn't stop. Didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't even check my map. I walked 6 straight miles out of those woods. When I saw my truck, I climbed in and locked the doors. Just sat there, watching the tree line, waiting. Nothing followed. Nothing moved. But as I rolled out onto the dirt road and glanced back one last time in the mirror, I saw something step out of the trees. Tall, thin, bent wrong at the joints, like it hadn't finished deciding on its shape. It watched for a few seconds, then dropped low to the ground and disappeared. I kept driving. I told my uncle I was done, that I wouldn't be going back. At the time, my life had started to feel like a photocopy of itself. Wake up, commute, work, microwave dinner, scroll myself to sleep, repeat. Nothing tragic had happened. My plan was simple. Hike solo in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a week. No big declarations. Just me, a rucksack, a beat-up tent I trusted, and enough dehydrated meals to get by. I turned off my phone before I even left the parking lot. No service anyway. but it felt symbolic. No updates, no pings, no one to check in with. The trail I picked was off the main loop, still marked on the maps, but clearly not a favorite. That was the point. I didn't want company or conversation. I didn't even want to think about other people. I wanted trees and dirt and a quiet that wasn't interrupted by car alarms or my neighbor's laundry timer. The first 2 days were what I'd hoped for. I hiked until my legs ached, found small clearings to sleep in, and cooked on my little burner. The air was sharp and clean, almost metallic. Everything smelled like wet pine and cold stone. The silence didn't feel lonely, it felt right. Like I'd finally shut off a machine that had been buzzing in the background for years. Then day 3 happened. I was following a ridge that overlooked a shallow valley when I saw it. Just off the trail, tucked beside a cluster of boulders, was a stack of firewood. 6 logs, split clean, arranged into a perfect little triangle. No fire ring, no scattered ash, no footprints that I could see. I stared at it for a minute. It didn't seem threatening, just weird. Maybe someone left it for later, or forgot about it. Or maybe it was some trail maintenance setup. I didn't really think much beyond that. That night, I stopped a little further down and made camp. I used the wood, figured it was fair game, and built a small fire. It felt normal, almost comforting. Tent set up, fire crackling, food warming up. I even let myself zone out for a while, staring into the flames like they were some kind of therapy. I went to sleep early. It was colder than the night before, and I zipped myself into the bag with my boots still on. Just lazy, not scared. Then around midnight I heard the steps. Slow, deliberate, not crashing through the underbrush, just that steady crunch of weight on pine needles. Pacing, back and forth just outside the tent. I sat up fast, pulse already hammering. My hand went for the flashlight. I unzipped the flap just enough to peek out. Nothing. Not a thing. Just dark trees and my own breath fogging in the beam of the light. But I waited. Sat there, heart pounding, trying to listen past the silence. It wasn't an animal. I've heard deer. I've camped enough to recognize raccoons nosing around. This wasn't that. This was someone, or something, walking in a slow circle around my tent. Twice. Eventually, I lay back down, fully dressed, one hand on the flashlight, the other on my pack. I didn't sleep, not really. Just lay there, wired and still, until the sun finally started leaking in. When I stepped outside, the wood pile was gone. Not burned, not disturbed, gone. The space where it had been was smooth, almost too smooth. No scraps, no splinters, no tracks, just bare dirt like nothing had ever been there. That was the first time I felt afraid. I packed up faster than usual. Didn't eat, just got moving. I hiked harder than I'd planned, didn't stop at my usual noon break spot. I told myself it was fine, just someone messing around. Maybe a weird ranger routine, maybe even a prank. But I knew better. The quiet wasn't calm anymore. It was heavy, like it was holding its breath. By mid-afternoon, I found the second stack. Same setup, 6 logs, perfect triangle. But this one had something extra. A strip of red fabric tied around the middle log. It was sun-faded, frayed at 2 ends. Looked like a piece of a t-shirt or maybe a bandana. I stood there longer than I should have. I didn't touch it, I didn't want to. I just stared at it, like I was waiting for something to explain itself. Nothing did. An hour later, the third one. But this time, the logs weren't on the ground. They were balanced on a thick, low-hanging branch about 9 feet off the forest floor. 6 of them, same shape, no rope, no marks on the tree. Just logs, sitting there like someone had carefully arranged them and walked away. I didn't stop this time, just kept moving, faster than before. That night, I didn't light a fire. I didn't cook. I didn't even unzip the tent all the way when I crawled in. I lay there stiff, flashlight in hand, boots still on, just listening. Everything was too still. No bugs, no owls, just the sound of my own breath. At 2:17 a.m., something touched the tent. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, just one slow press against the nylon wall, right by my head. I felt it more than heard it, a wide, flat hand. 5 fingers, spread apart, pushing. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink, just watched the shadow of it through the tent fabric. Then it dragged down, slowly, a single smooth motion like someone wiping condensation off a car window. And then it was gone. I didn't close my eyes again. As soon as the light started to come up, I grabbed everything, shoved it into my pack and got moving. I skipped food, skipped everything. I knew I had about 2 days of trail left, but I told myself I'd do it all at once. No more sleeping out here, no more chances. A few hours in, I saw him. He wasn't hiding. He was just standing there, off to the side of the trail, half behind a pine tree, bare-chested, covered in grime, like his skin had been rubbed with clay or charcoal. His hair was a thick, tangled mess, ropes of it. A piece of rope was tied around his waist like a belt, ends frayed and swinging. He wasn't moving, just standing. He there, watching. I raised a hand. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't react. I took one cautious step forward. He turned and vanished. Not ran, just turned and was suddenly gone. No sound, no movement in the trees, just nothing. That's when I snapped. I ran, flat out, no brakes. I didn't care about the weight of my pack, didn't care about tripping or twisting an ankle. Every crack of a branch behind me made me think he was right there. I ran until my lungs were clawing at my ribs, stopped once to throw up in the dirt, then kept running. 6 hours later, I stumbled into the ranger station. I looked like hell, soaked with sweat, shirt twisted sideways, hair matted to my face. I couldn't even form a full sentence at first, but the ranger didn't laugh, didn't look confused. He asked where I'd been hiking. I told him. He nodded. Then, "See any wood piles?" I blinked. "Yeah." Then he asked, "See anyone?" I hesitated, described what I saw. The man, the tent, the hand. The ranger didn't look surprised, just sighed and walked over to the radio. Another man showed up about 20 minutes later. Older, weathered, looked like he'd lived in that station longer than the paint. They talked quietly, like this wasn't the first time. Eventually, the older guy turned to me and said, "People talk about someone living deep out there. Doesn't come close, doesn't bother anyone directly, just moves things." "Firewood?" I asked. He nodded. "Tents sometimes, food too, but never trash, never leaves a trace." I slept on the floor that night. Didn't care. I just needed walls around me. In the morning, I booked the first bus home. Didn't care what it cost, just got out. I haven't hiked alone since. My Aunt Lucinda asked me to house-sit her cabin while she was off in Belgium visiting some old college friends she hadn't seen since the 80s. I just started working remotely a couple months earlier, so it worked out. Even the satellite Wi-Fi only worked when it felt like it. The place had always been a little isolated like that, but I remembered it from when I was a kid. We'd visit maybe once a year. It was always oddly cold inside, no matter the season, and full of weird stuff, mostly old taxidermy birds. Her late husband had been into it. Hawks, owls, some kind of massive crow with one wing askew. They were mounted all over, staring down with glass eyes like they knew something you didn't. Still, it was peaceful, quiet in a way that cities can't replicate. I figured a few days out there would help me reset, maybe even enjoy some sleep that didn't come with the background hum of sirens or apartment hallway arguments. The first couple of days were honestly pretty nice. I fed her cat, Milo, a stocky orange tabby with a perpetual scowl, kept the wood stove burning, and knocked out a few work calls. In the evenings, I'd throw on a hoodie and walk the porch with Milo trotting behind me, then curl up in the loft bedroom with a book. I slept with the window cracked, listening to wind move through the trees, and thought, this isn't bad at all. Then came the third night. I woke up around 2 in the morning, not gradually. 1 second I was asleep and the next I was staring at the ceiling, totally alert, like my brain had yanked the emergency brake. There wasn't any sound at first, just this sharp, unexplainable awareness, like being watched but not quite. More like being overheard. That's the best way I can put it. Like something was eavesdropping, even though I hadn't said a word. I thought maybe Milo had jumped onto the bed, but when I looked, he was still curled near the radiator, breathing slow and steady. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps on the porch, not stomping or rushed, just steady crunching over gravel and pine debris, like someone pacing casually. They stopped in front of the bedroom window. I held perfectly still, waited for the porch light to flick on, for something, anything, to confirm it. Nothing. No creak of boards, no motion sensor triggering. Eventually, I climbed out of bed and edged toward the window. I kept the blinds angled just enough to see through without being obvious. The rocking chair out front hadn't moved, nothing out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been right there. I barely slept the rest of the night. In the morning, I stepped outside to feed Milo and nearly tripped over it. A single boot print on the bottom step. Just one, crisp and unmistakable, like someone had stepped down, stopped, and vanished. No other prints led away. I checked the path, the gravel, even the yard. Nothing. I tried to write it off as a stray hiker from the Corewood Trail nearby. People cut through private land sometimes without even realizing. I left it at that and went back inside. But that night, right around the same time, it started again. Footsteps, this time circling the cabin, slowly, deliberately. I was in the kitchen and froze. Every light was off. I just stood there and listened as the sound moved along the siding, stopping at each window like someone was peering in. And then came the tapping, just 3 soft knocks against the back window. Light enough that I almost doubted I'd heard it, except I knew I had. I waited. Nothing else happened. No follow-up, no animal noises, no footsteps retreating. I stayed awake all night, sitting on the couch with Milo sleeping next to me and my hands clenched so tightly they cramped. The next morning I walked the property. The air smelled sharp, like cold pin, and damp dirt. Nothing seemed out of place until I got to the rear fence. It was one of those old split-rail fences, and 2 of the horizontal rails had been removed, stacked neatly to the side, like someone had stepped through without wanting to make a sound. After that, I didn't feel safe. Not just creeped out. Unsafe. I kept my phone on me, checked the locks twice, and jumped every time the floor creaked under my own feet. Around noon, a faint hiss came from the kitchen. I followed it and found the old radio on top of the fridge sputtering with static, the kind of sound you get when someone's flipping through empty frequencies. Thing is, it wasn't plugged in. The sound stopped the second I touched the power knob. That night, I stayed in the living room again. Lights off, blanket across my legs. Milo curled up on my chest this time, tense and awake with me. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the doorknob turned. Just slightly, like someone was gently testing it. The porch light flared on, lighting the front steps in this sudden white-blue glare. For nearly 30 seconds, nothing happened. I didn't even blink. Then the light clicked off, and a second later I heard fingers dragging slowly across the porch railing, like someone was letting me know they were still there. By sunrise, I'd already decided to call someone. I rang up the local ranger station and explained, badly, that I thought someone was snooping around the cabin. The guy asked for the address. I gave it, and after a short silence, he just said, "Stay inside tonight. Don't go near the trees." No questions, no follow-up, just that. Later that day, I went to grab a blanket from the hall closet and saw it, the attic door. Open, just hanging there, rope dangling. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even thought about it. I grabbed a chair, climbed up slowly, and peeked inside. It was mostly insulation and a few cardboard boxes, but right there, in the middle of the dust-covered floor, was a bare footprint. Human, clear heel-to-toe impression. No other marks, no trail, just one single step. I climbed down, closed the panel, and locked the bedroom door behind me. That night, I didn't pretend to sleep. I sat on the floor with Milo and a pocket knife in my hand, eyes on the ceiling. At 3:14 again, I heard it. The attic creaked, not the hatch, the floor above, a soft shift of weight, a brushing sound like fabric dragging across wooden beams. I didn't move, didn't call out, just stayed frozen until the sky outside lightened. Then I packed up, threw everything into 2 bags and left. I didn't even eat breakfast, didn't look back, didn't go near the attic again. I told my aunt I had to cut the trip short, didn't give her details. Milo came home with me. And I'm never going back to that cabin.